sense.
Well, I'm interested in your opinion about why religion prescribes all these sexual...
You need to take a course with me. I teach at Claremont a queer sexual theology course, and I teach queering religion at CSUN. And it's been an issue for me because I was a Roman Catholic priest.
Oh.
And, you know, there is deep linkages between sexuality and spirituality, except that it's so dangerous and it has to be constructed and separated. And so there's erotophobia there that's fused with a misogyny, especially within Christianity. And you have to, it's too long to even explain in terms of patriarchy that has constructed it this way. And certainly homophobia is born from a fear of misogyny in many males because they find that being feminine or effeminate to be horrific and terrified. And that's why there's a great deal of homophobia coming from a lot of young men.
Right.
I mean, it's just too big.
Well, Judaism looks at sex very positively, but it's limited within marriage, you know. But it's what you do on the, you know, on the Sabbath. You should have sex with your husband and wife, or so on. So it's not something that's forbidden. It's, you know, but it is powerful, and so because it's powerful, there are channels to it. So you can't lump the Jewish attitude together with the Christian attitude.
No.
They're different.
They're different, and I actually appropriate, when you make love on the Sabbath, you're twice blessed.
Yeah.
Within a Christian context.
Right. Well, Lois, Christopher Hitchens says that teaching children religion is child abuse. He even continues to say that it's moral terrorism. Do you agree with that, or what's your opinion on that?
No, I don't agree. You know, Christopher Hitchens is a polemicist. He says things to get to make a statement, to get controversy going, I think. I'm not sure that he believes that either, but he may. But I certainly don't think it's child abuse. I would prefer that children be brought up as humanists, but I have no dispute with people who bring up their children religiously, as long as they're not too extreme. You know, I do have a problem with fundamentalism, for instance.
Right. Well, he brings up the fact that children shouldn't be taught these things that basically kind of instill fear, perhaps, until they have gotten to an age of reason. So, what do you think about that?
I would bring up, I don't have children, but I work with a lot of young folks. I try to teach them to question, because I think questioning is good, and to be critical. You know, not to accept everything blindly. You get into a very cultic situation where authority is assumed by the religious leader, and that leads into a lot of trouble. So if you can help people to make decisions for themselves and to critically look at questions around religion, that's a healthy thing. And probably Lois and I agree on that point. And I see that as a positive value. Otherwise, you find yourself in fundamentalism, which is really not terribly depth experience. It parrots a dogmatism, and it's uncritical and violent.
So Matthew 5:17-18 says that Jesus wants Christians to follow the Old Testament word for word. So I wonder, that obviously can be really tricky in today's era.
You missed, that's not Matthew 5:17.
5:17-18.
Okay, quote it exactly, as opposed to...
and that's, I almost brought that. Theologists and philosophers have come to that conclusion that that's what it means, many of them. Well, the real question is, so how do Christians and Jews deal with those contradictions and anachronisms in the Bible?
Okay, first thing, Jesus will never say Old Testament.
Right.
I mean, there was no Old Testament.
He's used the word the law, I believe. The law, which have been prescribed to mean the Old Testament.
Okay, and Jesus was thoroughly Jewish. And not all Jews agreed in terms of the interpretation of the Torah. There were many different groups in the first century, and he had a particular orientation towards compassion. And it's not to say that other Jewish groups did not have that, but certainly he had a hard time with those who were very strict legalists. That didn't seem to bend, because later on in that same sort of dialogue that you find in Luke, Jesus says, be as compassionate as your God is compassionate.
Okay.
He has a hermeneutics of compassion.
Well, but I think we can probably agree that there are a lot of contradictions in the Bible, right? So I wonder, how do you...
All over.
Well,
all
you
over.
can't.
So how do you
yeah.
kind of decide which ones, I guess...
Because the way that Jewish religious law was established in the sort of post-biblical period, but even in the time of the Bible, there are questions about it. It's not just what's written in the first 5 books of the Bible. It's also, there's an oral tradition that mediated it, that interpreted it, and that every generation you have the leading scholars who decide. So anyone that says, I'm going to be totally Jewish and follow exactly what it says in Exodus, you're not doing the right thing, because that's not how Jewish law is determined. So that's sort of a statement out of ignorance. There's no pope. There, in the Jewish legal literature, there are majority opinions and minority opinions, and lots of behaviors that might be defined as sin are still couched with, but it's human beings can't do anything about it. It's God. This is in God's hands.
Right. Well, then I wonder, how does one decide which ones are right?
You don't. Well, it depends on the type of Jew that you are.
Okay.
If you are an Orthodox or conservative Jew, the decision is supposed to be made, follow the rabbi of your congregation, and he or she, in a conservative movement context, looks at the consensus among all rabbis. In the Reform and Reconstructionist movement, it's more up to your individual choice, and the rabbi is simply a guide. So there's a lot of emphasis on your own decision, your own estimation of what you can or cannot do.
I see.
And,
I see.
and within Christianity, fundamentalists and evangelicals tend to preach on the Hebrew Scriptures or Paul. They ignore the Gospels for the most part, because there's a dissonance between the mercy and compassion and peacemaking that you find within Jesus and their own theologies, which tend to be very violent and toxic. So there's really a dissonance there, so they avoid that.
Some argue that religion and religious righteousness or extremism has been a cause of many wars throughout history. Why do you think that is, Lois?
Well, probably because most people belong to some religion, and it kind of fits into the one side or the other of wars. I don't know that it causes wars, but it certainly is a factor in the war. People take a side because they're people. The people in their religion take that side, and then it becomes a controversy between the two, especially when there's two religions, one on one side and one on the other. I think that it does have an effect, for sure.
And fanaticism can be expressed. Ben Loudon and Pat Robertson are only in disagreement in terms of methods. In theologies, they're pretty similar.
Well, that's all the time we have. I wish we could talk about this for an hour, but thank you for coming. You're watching On Point, and my name is Matt Vanderveer. Lois, what is the difference between an atheist and an agnostic?
I would say there's no difference. Ask an agnostic if he has a belief in God, and he'll say no. And that means that's the definition of an atheist, a person without a belief in God. It isn't a person who says there is no God. It's a person who says he has no belief. And that's what an agnostic is as well. But there are people that have different views and different definitions of those words.